So you've got an idea for a WordPress product, but how do you take it from a rough alpha to a successful launch? Do you release early and iterate fast, or do you polish everything before the big debut? Today on WP Product Talk, we're breaking down the journey from alpha to launch, sharing real strategies, lessons learned, and mistakes to avoid. If you're building a WordPress product, this one is for you.
This is WP Product Talk, a place where every week we bring you insights, product marketing, business management and growth, customer experience, product development, and more. It's your go-to podcast for WordPress product owners by WordPress product owners. And now, enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody. I am Zack Katz, founder of Gravity Kit.
And I'm Matt Cromwell, co-founder of GiveWP and senior director of customer experience at Stellar WP.
And today we are talking about the topic, how to launch your product. This is the fourth episode of our sixth season of WP Product Talk, in which we're going through each stage of building a WordPress product step by step. Last week, we talked about how to create your product's brand and logo, but we need to launch that product.
And that's why we brought on a special guest named Jonathan Jernigan. Thanks so much for coming. Let's bring him on. Oops. There he is.
Hello.
Welcome. How are you doing, Jonathan?
Doing very well. Glad to be here, and I appreciate the invitation. Is that the most generic thing anybody says when they come on a podcast?
You know what?
I just hit it on the head.
You just asked a question, and that was actually the most unique thing that a guest.
Yeah, question everything. That's kind of what we're going to be doing today, as we're going to be questioning everything when it comes to what's important and what's not when you are trying to develop your product. So, Jonathan, please introduce yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Jonathan Jernigan. I got started in WordPress a little over 10 years ago now. I spent quite a few years bouncing around various page builders and eventually kind of found my stride, both in terms of client development and also my YouTube channel on WordPress in about 2018 when I started creating tutorials on Oxygen Builder. And that kind of got me into the YouTube space, and that became a whole driver that I never anticipated that kind of led me to where I'm at today. So nowadays I focus part of my time on PyCalendar and my courses, and then I do some very light client work on the side still. I really enjoy staying in tune with what it's like to build real websites for clients, partly because it just goes with the courses that I offer, but also just because it's fun keeping your skills sharp. So yeah, it's been in WordPress a fair many moons, not as much as some folks. There are people that are in it now, I guess, over 20 years. But when I look at the calendar and I see, oh wow, we're over 10 years now, I'm like, I'm getting old, aren't I?
Yeah, it's we're senior WordPressers at this point.
Absolutely.
And as senior WordPressers, geriatric, why are we talking about this, Jonathan? Why is this important for product owners and people looking to become product owners? Why is this an important topic?
I mean, I think probably the most compelling reason, without even discussing like the nuts and bolts of how to launch and what to develop and pacing and that kind of thing, would be the fact that a product affords you the opportunity to scale in a way that other avenues don't. Like creating client websites is great, and there are cases where you can charge large sums of money. Custom membership sites or large scale websites, you could do only a few a year and make a great income. But of course, that comes with a lot of other headache and challenges working with clients, as we all know, that can definitely bring. Whereas the product side is something that you can be a lot more honed in on. It can be much more narrowly focused, and you're able to dictate every part of the process, from what features you build, what you don't build, how you offer support, when you dictate all of the terms all of the time. And that to me is a big piece of it, along with the fact that it's a whole lot more scalable than trying to build an agency to do a bunch of client websites all at the same time. There's different challenges, of course, on the product side, but to me, it's the challenges are really enjoyable ones that
Mm.
I like.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the way that you described how you work with clients to remain in touch with their needs. I think a lot of our WordPress product owners and budding WordPress product owners are coming from the client side and realizing the needs that aren't currently met in the ecosystem, and then developing products. And that's how I got my start with the plugins that I have and the services that I have. Gravity View started because somebody needed a WordPress directory, and that was not a great there weren't great options at the time. They were already using gravity forms, and I said, well, they were already collecting the data, surely there's an easy way to display that. So I built, originally before Gravity View, I built a plugin called Gravity Forms Directory, and I put it on wordpress.org, and it was really popular. And that was how I knew what people wanted, because they would open a support ticket and they'd say, hey, can you add this functionality? It grew and it grew and it grew as I was doing this all for free. And I realized, oh, shoot, why am I doing this for free? This is an actual product. I'm going to convert that to Gravity View. So my path from client work to having a product went through .org. But then I didn't just develop it myself. I actually hired somebody to develop the core Gravity View, because it was a little more complex than I was used to building. It had a user interface, it had drag and drop, it had a bunch of different things that I wasn't familiar with, and I wanted to work with a designer and a developer to do that. So I did. And then once they had a foundation for it, I built on top of that, right? But that was the impetus and the way that I went about it. And we're still to this day implementing some of the less used features from Gravity Forms Directory plugin in Gravity View, because that wasn't in the 80/20. And I'm sure we'll probably get to the 80/20 rule later in our conversation. But that's my path from client work to products. Jonathan, what's your story here?
Very, very similar. I came up with the idea for PyCalendar when a real estate client of mine came to me and they said, we need our clients to be able to track these deadlines. There's these deadlines in these real estate contracts that if you don't meet, invalidate the entire thing, which can be, of course, extremely costly for everyone involved. And they said, we just need it to send some emails, drop some notifications in my inbox or on the website when a certain day arrives to remind you got to complete this item. And I thought, well, surely there's a bunch of calendar plugins for WordPress. There must be some way that I can just tie an ACF field or even just a simple little post into an event on a calendar. And it turned out that that was not really what any of the products out there did. They all were kind of designed more for live events or major kind of event-based calendars with ticketing and venues and all kinds of stuff. There wasn't something that was just really simple and really flexible. So it really came, which I was thinking about this before we went live. It's kind of that super cliche thing you hear people that are kind of on the other side of the product development lifecycle like say like, oh, we just came across it because a client needed it. And that's exactly what happened for me. It was out of a direct need that a client had. And that's, as I think about it now, it's probably part of the reason why I haven't completely abandoned client work, because it just keeps me so much more in tune with what real people need on a real website. So yeah, it's that generic solving a need that I thought surely there would be a product that already did, and as it turned out, it did not. So we just happened to plug that gap.
And how did you decide on what the core functionality would be? And how did you decide to turn it into a product instead of keeping it as just code for this one client?
Well, that's the latter part of your question is basically that I developed a MVP using some early ChatGPT assistance. Actually, like shortly after ChatGPT first launched, it enabled me to kind of tie together some disparate systems that was like a JavaScript calendar library, and then some ACF functions that would automatically update dates based on math calculations of like 7 days from today, but not on a Saturday. Like these different things that I could kind of fumble my way through, but when you start to smush them all together, it got way outside my league. Um, So that's kind of how it came together initially. And then I was like realizing like, this is so cool. This works so well for me. Surely if we made this just more simple to interact with and not require you to have, JavaScript and custom functions and all this stuff running around your site, that there would be other people that would need this. Um, and so I, like you, I went to one of my good buddies and I said, hey, I really need some help on the coding front. Like I'd really like to be involved in the architecture and sort of the design of the product, but from the nuts and bolts coding perspective, I'd like you to take over. So we formed a partnership there, and that was something that we both knew kind of couldn't do without the other. So it was a very symbiotic relationship, and still it's just me and him to this day. It's just the two of us, and such a it's such a joy. They say
Yeah.
don't go into business with your friends, but I'm glad I did.
I I want to get a little bit more specific. I actually been kicking the tires on PyCalendar on for WP Product Talk actually, because it's cool. It's a cool idea to have, like, we have all of our episodes that are all date based. And what if I could have like a calendar for upcoming episodes or past episodes? Like what was WP Product Talk talking about last November, for example? That was a really interesting time to be talking about WordPress. But so the idea that you can essentially add a date to any post type in the WordPress website and have that show up on a calendar, that's a cool, unique feature that I think sets you apart in a different way. How did you land on that approach specifically?
It's funny you say that, because that was such a core thing before we even started developing, was like, just how should it work? And I knew coming into it, just like I already explained, that there was no product that fit the that gave me the ability to achieve what I needed for that real estate client, which was exactly like you just described. We needed to have a post that just said, I forget what the specifics of those contract items were, but it's like deadline number 1, and we just needed one date attached to that, and like that's it. So I kind of used that as the foundation to it, to think about, well, if I needed this to work, it has to function on a custom post type that I set up, and therefore that essentially invalidates all the other calendar plugins, because they're going to set up their own events custom post type.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then I'm locked into that, but that doesn't work for what I needed. So when we started looking at it, we're like, well, why don't we just essentially do what other plugins do and tie in core WordPress functionality, like get ourselves in the sidebar, like a category almost, and just work on any post type. And so
Mm-hmm.
the name PyCalendar actually comes from, originally we were going to call the plugin, which I'm very glad we did not. We were going to call it any post into event. And then we just dropped off the A, post into event, PIE. So PyCalendar, that's where that came from. And that was the approach. It was like, maybe you have in your default posts, maybe you have some press releases that have a date attached to them, but maybe you also have an event CPT, and maybe you also have, like you said, some podcast episodes, and you want to show this mix of things on the calendar. And so we just wanted to give the flexibility to basically turn any post into an event. And we have people that do it in fascinating ways. Some people just use default posts. Some people use their pages. Some people use custom post types. Some people use ACF fields. It's like you can basically turn anything you want into an event on the calendar. Oh, also products too. People do WooCommerce products, SureCart products, all kinds of stuff.
That's awesome. That's really great. I think that's some of the secret sauce of why we want to do this this topic in particular right now, because at this stage, if somebody's building a new product, we talked about branding, we talked about logo. We got to start talking about like differentiators, or what's going to make your product unique. How are you going to build it out in a way that matters? Not that it's just like, to borrow WordPress's tagline, just another event calendar plugin. There's a million of just another AI plugin right now going on in .org, but what's going to actually set you apart in a unique and different way. So I appreciate that insight. That's super helpful. I'll say from my side, in terms of like figuring things out, I've said this on the show too many times, but like we had a similar circumstance with Give in the very beginning, that we were serving clients who wanted nonprofit. We were serving nonprofit organizations. They wanted a way to give. And it was like, well, do you want to set up a whole WooCommerce store just to be able to do a donation? Not really. And at that time, Gravity Forms wasn't really into payments all that much, although it was definitely possible. But it wasn't like a robust feature of theirs. And so we leaned in on that quite a bit. We also had a product before the product, kind of like Zack, that we actually sold a WooCommerce checkout plugin that was a one-page checkout essentially, because that was how we were how Devin, my partner, was trying to help nonprofits. It was a WooCommerce install, but they didn't want to go through a cart for a donation. That feels super weird. And so rather than the whole cart and checkout system, you just have a product, which is your donation page essentially, and you can do the checkout on that product page directly. And that's honestly where the idea of how we implemented GiveWP came from in the very first place. And when we launched, we definitely leaned in on that. We said I every once in a while I go back to the very first video we created with like a Fiverr video person and a Fiverr voiceover person, and we were like, you don't want to be just like a simple form plugin that just takes payments and doesn't do anything with your donors, and you don't want to be a whole giant e-commerce setup. Like we were really trying to nail that spot between Gravity Forms and WooCommerce. And we're like, that's where we think the sweet spot is for nonprofit organizations. And it resonated a ton with folks right out of the gate, right away. So
So
that process, I think, is super important.
it sounds like we've used our guts to determine whether or not what we're doing is a good fit for like product market fit. Did either of you, Jonathan, did you talk to other people other than the clients that you had this contract with to see whether or not that this was something that was needed out there? Like, how did you um, get the right mix of functionality outside of just the client that you were working with?
Well, that's a great follow-up question, because I was going to tie into what Matt was talking about. We were very clear from the outset that this plugin originally started just as a free version with the mission to just get something live on the WordPress plugin repository, just to see what it's like to get something out there, to just experience what that process looked like. And then we were like, well, if it has any legs in the free version, then maybe we can look at the pro version. And we kind of knew pro would have fancy things like recurring events and, WooCommerce support and stuff like that. But the free version would just be the most essential piece of this plugin. Very, very, very capable and adept, not artificially, hamstrung just because it's free. But I just wanted something that I would want to use. That was the other core, like, kind of tenet, was like, if I came across this, would I want to use this plugin? And that was like something that we thought a lot about, was like making sure that it's something that we would be proud enough to use ourselves. And also, kind of from that architecture standpoint, being very intentional about the things that we did not want to build. We didn't build it in a way where, advanced products like Bricks Builder can like kind of query into the data and those sorts of things. We wanted it to just be like this very clear, focused, event calendar solution, not a whole bunch of crazy like developer features. We've gone slightly more in that direction as time has gone on, but my co-founder and I, Elijah, have this term that we jokingly call the simplicity gun. Like if one of us comes up with an idea, or somebody asks for a feature, we go look at it and we jokingly say we're going to shoot it with the simplicity gun. Like if the idea is like a Zoom integration, well, what do they actually want? Like, is it just the ability to drop a link into the event data that connects them to Zoom? Like trying to figure out like, what is that piece that we can just continue stripping down to its absolute core, into the most simplest possible, iteration of that feature or that idea. And that's how we were starting from the very beginning, was like relying on core, block editor components. Like all of our sidebar controls are the native, like, block editor Gutenberg components. So none of that is custom coded. Benefit being that we didn't have to worry about accessibility, because all that stuff was already accessible from the outset, which was cool. So I guess I'm rambling a little bit, but the idea that like we before we developed anything, we were just looking at what's the simplest possible functional version of this, and making sure that we weren't reinventing the wheel. We could have built our own date picker, but that would have been super silly. The block editor already has that.
Mhm.
And I've lost the plot of where I was headed. So maybe somebody recover me.
No, I think that's great because in many ways, that's exactly the purpose of a WordPress plugin is to look at core and enhance it in ways that benefit the end user. What is it in there that a user wants to do but can't currently? And how can I do that in the well, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you get to that approach of like, what's my quickest way to market? What's my smallest lift I could do, or what's the absolute minimum viable product that I can ship? There might be a time at which you find that the core date picker doesn't serve your purposes, but that will come after tons of experience and feedback from customers, and that's the right way to iterate anyway. So I think it's great. I think that's a great approach. Really smart. I didn't even notice that though when I was looking at the date picker because you have a start date and an end date in the little block settings, and I didn't notice that was the core date picker. Are the buttons also core? Because they look a
Those
little bit different.
those two buttons are not, but basically
Yeah,
everything else is.
yeah,
Like
got
all the
it.
little toggles and date pickers, the little like accordions for recurring rules that expand and contract, those are all native components. And we did that partly because like I said, reinventing the wheel, which just wasn't necessary, but also like somebody else already did the heavy lifting to figure out
Yeah,
how do you make that operate just without even looking at like the functionality of what we were trying to achieve. You had to figure out, well, how do I make an accordion and a date picker and all those tiny little things that can end up making you spin your wheels and almost never release anything.
yeah,
um, you had asked just previously as well about that evolution of the getting the product launched, and I touched on like the idea that we began with free, and that was our decision to move forward. We released the free version. um, I forget when. There was a gap of about 4 months, but immediately we put the free version out there. I reached out to some friends, posted a YouTube video on it, and people were like, wow, this is amazing. And as soon as we had some positive feedback, it was like there was no money. We didn't make anything off of it yet, but we just realized like, okay, other people want this. So now we can look at adding additional features like recurring events and WooCommerce support and those kinds of things. But then even still, we we're super slow to move, which some people dislike, but we wait to see like how are people going to use this in the real world and
mhm,
what features do they really want. You have somebody that emails you and says, for example, they want a Zoom integration. You're like, oh, I can build that, but we have a feature
why?
request tracker internally, and one person, legitimately one, has ever asked for that. So you
Yeah,
could waste a bunch of time going down that route, or you can wait and let the stuff bubble up to the top. One of which, as an example, that came probably after about a year, we kept seeing people asking for the ability to add blackout dates. So if you have a recurring rule of repeat every 1 week, they're like, I want to black out this one specific date in that interval for Christmas or a national holiday or whatever. And we didn't have that, but we were like, we're seeing this again and again and again. So we were able to add that in. But that was something I'd never even anticipated going back to the beginning. It's just like, I want recurring events because I needed it for that client. But they had no use for blackout dates. So I never anticipated that, um, which was perfectly fine to launch without.
yeah.
So you can definitely sit there and spin your wheels adding custom functionality and things you think people need, or you can start super small and get it out there and just see how people use it in the real world. People are going to use it in ways you just never expected.
Yeah.
And
I
did
also
you
really
launch
like your go ahead, Zach. Sorry.
did you launch with any sort of metrics gathering? Like, how did you judge what people needed only through customer support interaction, or did you proactively ask for feedback? How did you gather additional information?
The very early stages was before we even put it on the repo. I was sending it to just like a close group of friends who I know use the block editor and would be
Mhm.
able to kind of put it through its paces. In fact, Kyle from the admin bar is in chat, and he was one of the people I sent it to, just knowing like he does a lot of event-based things. Like, let me get his take on it, and just a couple of other people like that who I knew could potentially try it out and use it in a real production environment. And pretty quickly they were like, "This is great." So that super small, like closed not beta, but sort of like closed group of friends or peers that you could share it with to get some initial feedback. That one's tricky because your friends are probably always going to tell you that it's cool, even if it's not. So
Mhm.
probably need to expand beyond just like your close core.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say to answer your question, it was probably the close group of friends that I initially shared it with, then putting it on the repo and just trying to drum up some noise on YouTube and various posts and stuff, so that then I could then we could have some real users that I did not know putting it through its paces.
Yeah. I really like the approach of using .org basically as your initial launch, and validating the idea essentially. I think that's really smart. And that is a choice that folks have to consider in one way or another. Like, how do I want to get out of the gate? What kind of, not just features I have, but what kind of business model approach do I want to have at launch? When we were thinking of Give, we knew what we wanted in the free plugin really clearly. It was a little bit unclear exactly the way we wanted to do some paid options, but we knew that, for example, at that time, a Stripe add-on was going to be the most important paid add-on for us. So like we went out of the gate with PayPal only in the free one, which at that time it was PayPal standard, so it was really a clunky experience. Um, but and then you're like, oh, or you can like have credit cards right on your website, but for that you need to get an add-on. And so free and a little bit of paid right out of the gate helped us. But I love the ability to, like I said, validate and get feedback based on your free users in the first place. Way back in the day, people used to ship plugins to .org not as products at all. They really were basically elaborate snippets of code that were like, hey, this was kind of really useful to me, kind of like GitHub snippets. This was useful to me in a certain way. Maybe it's useful to you too. And if you have a problem, good luck with that. But nowadays, people are really expecting full featured things for free all the time. And I really would like folks to get back to the day of just like, really think of free only as MVP as much as possible. Lean, clean, minimal, and focus on talking to those users as much as possible, like you have been. I think that's a great approach.
Yeah, I agree that it's a great approach. And as a developer, I want to make sure that you're structuring your product so that it can scale to pro gracefully.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some different methods of doing this, but one of the kind of most straightforward, I think, might be structuring it so that each feature has its own files, or maybe even its own directory for each feature, and then you can include those as necessary or exclude those as necessary from your build script. And that's just kind of like a development aspect of it, because going from alpha or even just a .org free plugin to going to something that you distribute on your own website, people pay for, there are a lot of technical considerations that go into that. I'd love to talk more about how we all chose our distribution methods and the technical methods for going from alpha to actually having a paid product.
Yeah, and while we're on this subject, before we get too deep in one angle, there's the technical considerations of structuring the plugin files and free versus pro and that kind of thing, and also the financial side too. I think that's an important thing that people
Hmm.
get hung up on: lifetime deals, subscriptions, and that's an angle that we can touch on. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so from the technical side, what we decided to do was have the free and the pro plugin be completely standalone from each other, so that you don't have to have the base free plugin and the pro. They're standalone, which if you're looking to kind of, I'll say, game the repo, that was a mistake, because
Mm-hmm.
then, if somebody switches from free to pro, technically you lose an install or multiple, depending on how many they're using. But in the architectural side, that means that they have one less plugin installed on their site, and then if anything happens to .org, or we're not burdened with coming up with a way to also provide the free plugin in the future as well. So from that perspective, it has both advantages and disadvantages, I would say. When we saw some of the stuff that took place last year, uh, with regard to the repo, we kind of breathed a sigh of relief, thinking, okay, well, fortunately, our pro version is completely separate, and the free version doesn't have any kind of impact on that, which is nice. And then, in the code, that's not really my angle, but I do know that there are a lot of things that that actually exist in both sides. That's one thing I was saying. We didn't artificially hamstring the free version. Instead, all of the functionality, not all of it, but some of the functionality is there. You would just need to add a little hook or a function to your site to enable it. But if you want the convenience, then you can just move into the pro side, which then makes it much, much more simple for us to maintain those two separate code bases because they're actually quite similar.
Yeah. I mean, just to back up a little bit, I definitely think there's a lot that a lot of folks can consider. The free and pro option is one, or a free and an add-on option is another one, or even the way that you have it set up, which I think is free versus pro. Like a free and pro is basically like the add-on model, but you just put everything into pro essentially, which some folks do. But and then the free versus pro is like when you install pro, it deactivates free. Do you also delete it? You don't delete it.
No, we
You
don't
just
do that.
yeah.
We don't mess with
That would
stuff like
be
that. They can
that would
just
be
do it
kind of
themselves.
hard and scary and stuff. Yeah. But that, and I will, like, I totally understand what you're saying about like it might feel like gaming the system in some way, but I definitely think active installs are a big validator for customers or for people in general who are cruising the repo and want to see whether or not anybody cares or likes this product at all. And the other one that is a little bit strange is that like the .org moderators might get a little bit weirded off if you have like 500 5-star reviews, but only like, 100 active installs. They'd be like, where did all these people come from? So there's weird quirks of that that go that way as well. But I mean, thinking through all of it, it is a business decision for sure. I like the way you think through it in terms of independence, and unfortunately I do feel like every product owner now for WordPress has to start thinking about their independence escape clause in one way or another. But there's also just the way in which we build the code to support each of these different models. Zack, I think that was a little bit of what you were getting into, right?
Yeah, there's building the code, the technical side of it, but for me, and I think a lot of product owners, the concept of distributing the actual zip file from your own website is a real big blocker. And there are some different ways around that. Like there are different solutions for this. We use easy digital downloads most of the time, and that was a choice that I made years ago when Pippin Williamson was still running the plugin. We continue to use it today. I think if I were starting from scratch, and I'm actually doing this with DataKit, another plugin that we're releasing, and we're using Freemius because Freemius has out of the box the ability to ship different zips based on pro and free features and distribute them. And you don't have to deal with any of that. You just integrate with Freemius, which is a really nice way to do it. EDD has given us so many problems over the years. It also is relatively affordable, and it has unlimited customization, which can hurt yourself and if you don't pay attention. Yeah, there are pros and cons to that. It's very simple to integrate with CodeWise, and we don't currently do anything too extreme on the plugin code itself, but boy, we've had a lot of issues with upgrading and downgrading licenses and things getting out of sync, and it's kind of a mess.
Yeah.
So the licensing side of things is really complicated, and I think there's a trend that's starting, and we want to get on this trend, on board this trend as well, where you use OAuth and you just have people connect to your own website instead of having to deal with licenses. You just have them sign in, and that also has the side benefit of, hey, guess what? If you don't have access to the administrator account that bought this license, you don't have access to the plugin, which is a good way to get rid of a lot of piracy. So those are some considerations that we're taking into account these days. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, my perspective as of I'll just say as of late, but that is like of the last 5 or 6 years, is really heavily impacted by the customer experience aspect of all these things. And the
Hmm.
licensing stuff ends up being sometimes, unfortunately, highly problematic
Hmm.
and difficult and challenging. So the one thing I do like about Jonathan's approach with the pro versus free is that you can kind of bake licensing into a pro version. That's actually the route that we take on a couple of the Stellar products. Is you purchase the thing, you download it. When you install the zip, the license is actually generated in the zip generation part, and it just is kind of like baked in. You just install it, and it's licensed automatically, because you have the whole trouble where people buy something, they download a zip, they install it, and then they never activate their license. Until all of a sudden there's a problem. But then by the time there's a problem, they're upset and bothered. So I really love also the OAuth method. I think the part about like, disabling functionality and things is something we should have an episode on for sure. Because it is complicated, and it's a touchy subject in the open source space. But it is something that everyone as a business owner has to consider in one form or another. But I also really like, I mean, with Give, we decided that it was going to be an add-on model from the beginning. So there was all the core functionality is in the free plugin. And if you don't have any add-ons at all, you have all these features, and it's really full featured, and there's all kinds of things you can do. You don't need an add-on if you don't want. Um, then all of the add-ons, they aren't like unique or special parts of a bigger puzzle. They're all available because of the way in which we made the core product highly extensible, which I like it as an approach. It has, of course, I do. I mean, that's what we chose. But like, it has its advantages in terms of like helping to encourage a large developer community around your product as well, because people can be building out their own individual add-ons. And it's one thing to have like a bunch of like snippets. Like I could say personally, in the WP Product Talk site, I don't even have a functionality plugin. I just have one of those code snippet plugins, and I have like 25 different tiny little snippets that are customizing things. Every time I feel like I have to customize like seriously simple podcasting plugin, I feel like, oh, why do I have to go and do this? And I have to da 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 da. But if I actually go and build an add-on for seriously simple podcasting, I feel like I've accomplished something. It's a totally different feel as an end user who knows how to extend stuff. But also, if you're going to go that route, then you have to be willing and open to actually supporting that developer community, which honestly, I feel like Give could do a lot better on that front.
And
Over the
backward
years.
compatibility is a big problem,
Yeah.
especially when you're trying to get a product from alpha to launch.
Yeah.
Jonathan, you were talking about uh, just getting things out there, seeing how people like it. How concerned were you with back compatibility? And how concerned are you today if you've made major changes to the code base?
I mean, that was for sure a big consideration early on, which is part of why we started with such a small plugin, very simple, very focused, and tried to rely on things like the core components we talked about, the core date picker and those kinds of things, because we knew somebody else is going to be doing the heavy lifting on that, considering what happens if we change this particular facet about the calendar picker. But also from an under the hood perspective, there's not really anything revolutionary about PyCalendar. It's just the way that we've architected this experience. Like for example, when you turn on the little toggle that says show on calendar, all it does is just set a little meta field that says PyCal show on calendar equals 1. Like that's it. And then we just query the posts that have that particular meta field set to 1. It's like about as simple as it gets. So unless there's some absolutely majorly breaking way that WP query would change, maybe we would have to do something about that. But most of the things that we decided to do were as close to core as they could be and as simple as they could be, so that when it came time to add some additional feature, we didn't have this whole legacy code base to consider. And we have the advantage of something that's extremely focused and quite small in scope as compared to a Gravity Forms or a Give WP that's and incorporating subscriptions. We don't have anything complicated like that. So that was another very intentional decision, was not doing things that would be potentially, what am I trying to say? Like technical debt that wouldn't incorporate a bunch of extra technical debt. And the thing is, though, even with a tiny plugin like ours, it's been coming up on 2 years now, and we're starting to see some of the decisions we made early on are coming back to bite us. Like
Mhm.
an example is, we never anticipated people would want to put 2 calendars on one page. That seemed crazy, but people do.
Yeah.
And so what it does is it breaks both calendars when you put 2
Uh-huh.
on one page. And we're like, oh my gosh, how? First of all, why did we not consider that? But it just seemed like a use case that nobody would need. But as a consequence of that, we'd have to go almost back to square one. So we've kind of just decided, sorry, that's a limitation that everybody's going to have to live with. And so far, people have been
Mhm.
okay with that. But
Mm.
even with our hyper focused attention to not wanting to introduce technical debt, not trying to reinvent the wheel at every stage, we still ran into a problem a year and a half later that is almost like impossible to fix now. So
Mhm.
there's a balance there where you have to figure out, like, the you can try to make it perfect, but it's just not going to be in the real world.
Yeah.
It's you just have to get it out there and make some decisions, and also being okay with not pleasing everybody. That's another
Yeah.
big reason we went the approach we did with PyCalendar, that doesn't have ticketing, doesn't have payments, doesn't have venues. Um, People ask us for that, and we just have to tell them, no, sorry.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it makes for a slower growth, but the people who are a good fit for your product are a really good fit when you're
Yeah.
hyper focused like that.
I will say, from the perspective of someone who has had to experience the technical debt problem on on the on the bad side too often. Like, I can go down the list. Like, GiveWP has done several big refactors, and 3.0, for example, we actually did it over the course of more than a year, almost a year and a half. Most of it under the scenes, under the surface, slowly, kind of like pushing out new internal APIs. Um, while also shipping out a couple new features, basically like, hey, big new feature. Oh, this cool thing that you don't care about, but it's going to change everything in the future. And that was the way that we kind of rolled things out slowly. It took forever. It took over a year and a half just to get to the point at which we're like, all right, everything's the same, except it's all different code now. Like, it was really not a big, significant change. It was just internals. Cadence blocks also, big, huge change, revolutionized all the blocks. That one went through a huge bunch of hot fixes for a long period of time, because there was no way to anticipate all the ways in which all those blocks that are on all these thousands of sites have been customized and leveraged and embedded inside of other blocks that we don't control. It was really a nightmare. TEC also, tons and tons of refactoring that happened. The most recent one is Solid Security, Solid Backups. That was formerly Backup Buddy on iTheme's side. And Backup Buddy was a plugin that does backups locally for you on a cron, essentially. And that's really not a way to do backups in this day and age anymore at all. And so what were we going to do to actually make it a viable, continue to keep it as a viable product? It really just basically had to be scrapped. We really literally, the new next gen backups is a whole brand new product that it's just trying to continue as what it was, but it's a whole brand new product. Like, that was one of the times in which we just said, no, hard pass. We're not going to carry on that technical debt at all anymore. But the biggest thing I would say about technical debt with all those things is, I think that when you are a developer founder, like, you have tons of sleepless nights about technical debt. You're just like, every day we're just creating this debt that I'm going to pay in the future, and I hate it and I don't want to do it. From a CX perspective, and I mean, also a developer, but I would say, yeah, and that's just the way it is. Like, you literally are just going to continue to do that no matter what you do. That's similar to what you were just saying, Jonathan. And you could try your best, But at one point, it's just going to be too much, and you're just going to have to pull the Band-Aid. And I would not try to have sleepless nights over it. You'll make that choice when you have to, and don't like do all kinds of weird. I've seen so many different products who try so hard to avoid all those types of things to the point at which they don't even ship what they want to ship anymore. It's really crippled their ability to get stuff out the door. And that's, to me, worst case scenario when it comes to that question.
I agree. And with Gravity View, we built out so quickly. Looking back, we built out probably too quickly in the first year or so after we launched. And I didn't have the skills that I needed to build out in a way that was scalable for the future. So I added a lot of the technical debt that we are still handling today. We did a big version 2.0 release that added on top of our 1.0 API a bunch of new API hooks, and we've been using both still to this day. We've been slowly deprecating and slowly planning for a 3.0 that will remove the 1.0, but we're still dealing with the repercussions of me doing mediocre code back in the 1.0 days. So for advice for product owners that are trying to go from alpha to launch, I would suggest thinking about things from the level of importance it is to the product. If this is going to be needed for every single query that you use, for example, pay more attention to it. Give it more time. Let it steep. Ask professional advice if you need to. Ask an AI at this day and age, like, hey, what are some downsides to this approach? As opposed to, if it's the name of a setting, it doesn't matter. If it's whether or not you have labels above or below, it doesn't matter. All of the little things, just scoot right over them. They don't matter. The big questions, though, that's where I would suggest putting most of your attention and effort in getting that hopefully more right than wrong. We got a lot of things right with Gravity View 1.0, but the extension of that too quickly by me resulted in a lot of cruft that we're still dealing with. So pay more attention when you're adding new code. That is vitally important.
And I mean, at that end, you got a product to market quickly and got real customers paying real money. And yes, you have some headache now, but I think the interesting thing about that whole concept is the vast majority of users of these plugins, I would imagine even for something like Gravity Kit, Gravity View is that's a pretty complex plugin. You're doing some pretty complex things, or it's at least capable of doing that. But the people that are using it may not be developers themselves. They don't really care what's under the hood. Does it do the end result that they're after quickly, without a whole lot of headache, without breaking their site? And can they trust that it's just going to work for the foreseeable future? I think that's the most important consideration. Obviously, we don't want to just cowboy code everything, but the getting it out there more quickly and just making sure that you have something that solves that pain point. It's there's a more root concern than technical debt, because it's unavoidable. And I actually don't think it's that bad to allow someone or to tell people, hey, in 6 months we're coming out with 2.0. It's not compatible with this old version, but XYZ reasons are so much better, and this is why. And I think with users that love your product, it's not out of the question to say, you're going to have to upgrade.
And in terms of the extensibility, I liked adding a bunch of filters and actions out of the box, from version 1.0, even if people didn't want it, because I knew as a developer that that's something that I wanted. I would recommend not adding filters, not adding actions, and declaring all your classes final by default to prevent anybody from overwriting your functionality with their own customizations. And then if somebody asks for it, and then another person asks for it, add a filter. And that's against my whole ethos as a developer. I get so frustrated when I don't see a filter. But as a product owner, it would have been a lot simpler if I had known the number of people that actually wanted a filter and didn't have to maintain back compatibility for 10 years on a stupid filter that nobody's actually using.
Absolutely. An amazing point. We shipped with almost no filters in PyCalendar, both in free and pro. Very, very little. Essentially just enough to give us things like WooCommerce support, like the basic fundamentals. We would have people that asked regularly about adding the featured image on the calendar. If you click an event, there's an optional popover that shows up, and it can show like date and time and title and stuff. And people would ask all the time, can we add featured image? And so at that point, we added a hook so that the featured image could go in the popover. But
Mm-hmm.
we didn't add that out of the gate. I would say now we still only have probably 10 or 12, not that many. But also we couldn't have anticipated the ways that people would actually want to use those hooks. Like there's a little PyCal info shortcode / block that will display like on the single post view when this event starts and stops, the time zone, and so on. Some people want to show the word starts on before the time. Some people don't. Some people want to get rid of the period after the end. Some people don't want to show the time zone. Some people do. So now we have a few different hooks for that, but originally we didn't have any. And so kind of letting real users, like you already said, Zach, dictate what makes sense to add. And you still have the option to say, sorry, that's not something I'm interested in supporting. But when people are consistently asking you for the same things, it makes sense to appease that, because it just makes it better, more flexible, and it's not that big of a deal to do. Change some text.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that one, I'm a little bit split always on the strings one, because technically, if they're internationalized, or then they can always customize it that way.
Right.
But asking them to like install like local, what is that? Loco
Translate.
Local translate, thank you, or translate press or something like that, just to change one string, but they can also do it with a snippet, things like that. But that's also to your point earlier about like being able to extend core. Like we don't think of those as filter; they're not filters and hooks, but they are absolutely extensible, just by doing common WordPress practices.
And I try to think of that from the perspective of how would I feel if I was on the receiving end of the support ticket with that response.
Totally. Yeah.
I want to get rid of that period, and I'm telling them, hey, you got to go install logo translate for that to get rid of that one period. It would annoy me so much. So it would just be like, come on,
Absolutely.
dude, like seriously. So I try to think about it from that perspective. I ask myself that all the time. Like, if I was on the other end of this support ticket, what would I think? And I go back to Brian from Perf Matters. Their docs are incredible. Their support is amazing. And I just think about like, what would Brian do? That's that's genuinely something I think about all the time. Just like,
I really love what you're saying there, and because the mantra in WordPress for so long among developers in particular was decisions, not options. Like, let's be smart and make these decisions on behalf of the user rather than give them options that they actually think they want. Like that was kind of how decisions, not options was often used. Like if we're smart enough, we can do this for them. And I love the way you're saying is basically like, rather than that, let's just ask like, how am I going to answer a support ticket about this thing? Because that's so very, very customer centric. So I super appreciate that.
Well, I think it's time for our section of the show called Best Advice, where each of us gives our best advice on this topic. And I'll start. And I think that my best advice is to make sure that your MVP, your minimum viable product, aligns with what people want. I know I've had some ideas that are very specific and very unneeded, and nobody actually wants them. So talk to some people who you feel like are your best customers. Even just a quick Zoom call or even a chat on, heck, you can DM people on LinkedIn and be like, "Hey, I know you, I know you use this plugin that I'm trying to extend. I want to add this functionality. What do you think?" Get some ground truth to it before you start pushing hard on it, because it's more often than not for me, it's a bad idea.
I'm going to extend your best advice with my best advice, which is just like Zach says that, build something customers actually want. I'm going to say build something that you're an expert on. Like I have seen so many folks, what's that phrase? It's not, they're not scratching an itch. They're like a hammer looking for a nail. I'm trying to find the right phrase. and it's like basically like they're trying to create solutions for stuff that nobody's asking for, and
And creating a market
that,
is hard.
yeah.
If you're solving a problem that people don't know they exist, that is not an easy row to hoe.
But if you're an expert, if you have expertise on something in particular, you're solving that thing all the time in different ways. Come out of your expertise, basically. Like have your product come out of your actual lived experience. Not be like, I'm a developer, I could build anything. Let me go build this thing about Google Maps that I think is super cool and nobody wants it. You're not an expert at that field. You know how to do it, but like folks are going to be like, who's this person building this thing? And you're not going to have the expertise there. It's going to, in the long run, it's not going to be great for your brand and things like that. I really think like building out of who you are and what you have, your resume, really makes a huge difference when it comes to the longevity of any product.
And for the record, Matt's referring to, I believe, a product that they had, and it was a very good product. For the record, it was a good product. It just didn't succeed.
What are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about.
Your Maps product? Have you forgotten already?
Oh, that's true. That's true. We did have a Maps product.
It's just like totally
really
background
cool.
processing.
That's true. We had too many products that we had and ditched because it really, they served a need. We didn't know what we were doing. It was super cool. Nobody cared.
Jonathan, what's your best advice?
I have a lot of products that I have started, either never saw the light of day or launched and realized I missed the mark on pricing, benefits, features. One in particular, I spent with another developer just in dev time, like over $10,000 on and launched. And I was genuinely on the verge of tears. I was convinced. I was like, this thing will work. It will make good money. It will solve this amazing use case. No one cared. In the first month, there was like 3 people that signed up, and it was hard to pull that plug and try again. But had I continued barreling down that avenue, PyCalendar probably never would have seen the light of day. So I think getting the MVP launched and out there, but being very willing to adapt quickly to whatever happens. Suddenly I found that PyCalendar was seeing some success. So I needed to drop off some client work to be able to fill in the extra time for PyCalendar, whatever, support tickets, testing, development time. Or had it not, that was the other thing I was going to say. Elijah and I agreed that we would commit to PyCalendar for exactly 2 years. So by May 30th, 2025, we would say, are we going to continue doing this, or are we going to wrap it up, close the doors, maybe sell it, get a little bit of money back out of it? And by now I can confidently say it's absolutely, we're going to continue. We love it. There's a lot of, a strong user base, but I think maybe, being willing to push that MVP out there and commit to it for X amount of time. It's super, super simple. Like if you look at our initial sales graph, it does this, and it comes down for a while. And now it's like a roller coaster. It's slowly ticking its way up, very slowly, partly because we did not do an LTD. It's just always been subscription. But get it out there quickly. Don't be afraid to pull the plug. But if it does start to see some success, commit to it for a considerable amount of time. I would say in hindsight that like 18 months is probably the right amount of time. If you start to see some users, you hopefully will have enough revenue by then that you won't feel that burnout. The excitement will still be there. And then maybe you'll have a viable product on your hand and you can hone in on that one thing. Stop doing client work, maybe.
That's great advice. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you online?
I have both a YouTube channel and my website, which are just jonathanjernigan.com. And my YouTube channel is also just my name, Jonathan Jernigan. So either way is great to connect.
Excellent. Well, everybody tune in next week. We are going to be talking about how to choose a business and pricing model for your product. I'm super looking forward to that. Same bat time, same bat channel. So.
Yeah, and special thanks to Post Status for being our green room where we coordinate things. If you're enjoying these shows and WP Product Talk, please do us a favor and hit like, subscribe, share it with your friends, reference it in your show, your newsletters, and don't forget, tune in next week. Thanks, everyone.